This podcast is sponsored by developmentaid.org, your gateway to international tenders, grants, and the largest job database in the aid sector. Secure free registration and access funding opportunities, calls for partners, exclusive insights, and weekly news digest. Become a member today to achieve your sustainable development goals.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Development Aid Dialogues. I'm really excited today because we have Desiree Ketabchi, who lead the humanitarian action and advocacy at Oxfam Belgium, where she has been working for the last 4 years. She is based in Brussels and has previously worked at the European Parliament and Premier Urgency International, among other organizations. There is a lot happening in the world right now, and we will dive into how the EU decides where its aid goes, especially when some crises like Ukraine have the spotlight, while others like Haiti, Sudan, or the Sahel risk being forgotten. We will also get Desiree's take on what happens when major donors like USAID pull out of fragile places like the DRC and what this means for people whose lives depend on that support. And of course, we cannot ignore Gaza, where every day seems to bring new challenges and urgent needs. Desiree, thank you so much for making time today. I have been looking forward to this conversation.
Hello, Hisham. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Desiree, millions of people suffer in silence every day in crises that rarely make headlines. How does it feel knowing that while Ukraine gets a lot of attention and funds, places like Haiti, Sudan are left struggling in the shadow? What does this mean for those affected?
It's definitely frustrating. We try to make our humanitarian action as people-centered as possible. So this means that we look at needs rather than politics and geopolitics. On the other hand, we try to look at Ukraine as an example also. What is the result when people and government feel solidarity towards people in need? So we have mixed feelings, let's say.
But from Oxfam's view, are EU aid decisions mostly political, or are there practical reasons behind focusing on some crises over others?
Humanitarian aid is more and more linked to geopolitical interests, or more openly so than before, which, it means that it's difficult to fund actions in overlooked emergencies, like you said. And also public fundraising is more difficult. If it's not in the media, people will not feel so close to a crisis. And then, on the other hand, also humanitarian needs are growing and funds are decreasing. So yes, it's quite difficult in this global system where that's already overstretched.
Was it always difficult, or it became difficult?
It's becoming increasingly difficult. Yes, funds are decreasing and needs are increasing, and conflicts are also becoming longer and more impactful. This is also why we ask donors for flexible funding, so that we can deliver aid on the base of needs and on the base of what people need at a certain time, rather on geopolitical interest and economic reasons.
And do donors accept this concept of flexible donations or funding?
It depends. It depends on the donor, but we do have ears that listen to us. The practice is more difficult. Even internally, governments have their own difficulties because the humanitarian bodies are sometimes separated from the actual government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so the deciding body. So even among donors, we find the frustration for blockages to more flexible fundings.
Desiree, what can advocates do to push donors to take these forgotten emergencies seriously and fund them fairly, especially when media focus and political interest pull resources away?
We show the impact on people, the linkages between different crises. We live in a global system, so all the contexts are interlinked. We show also how people are always, and especially women and girls and young people and children, are the most affected by crises and conflicts. So we focus on showing that to the public and to governments and decision makers in general.
Do you think that the situation in Sudan was affected negatively with what's happening in Gaza?
In terms of attention, you mean?
Yes.
When there is one big story in the media, for sure, other stories have less space. So I think undeniably Sudan is affected negatively by Gaza, yes.
especially when we're speaking about fragile communities, women and children. There's majority of the victims in Sudan, and I think it is somehow very large amount of population getting affected by this situation, but it doesn't have the same impact in media coverage and also from donor organizations.
I agree with you that Sudan doesn't receive the same attention as Gaza from donors, from the public, from the media, and this has a big impact on the crisis, yes, and on the humanitarian context and on vulnerable population.
On the same context, USAID's sudden funding cuts in fragile areas like the DRC have created big gaps in health, water, and sanitation services. How is Oxfam dealing with this on the ground, and what don't people fully understand about the real impact these cuts have on everyday lives?
Unfortunately, due to USAID cuts and other donor cuts, we were obliged to reduce the response and the team in the DRC. Unfortunately, the ultimate victims are always the vulnerable people because they are going to receive less support. And also, I mean, in conflict situation, the humanitarian aid is the first support that people receive, the first protection. So it's in the end, they are the one paying the most.
And is there any alternatives for people who are suffering?
Since there are cuts are affecting all the organizations and as well as the UN, the system is trying to rethink itself and to be more efficient, to be more people-centered. These were reflections that were already ongoing before, and the risk is that accelerating might create more chaos, but in the end is also, we try also to make the most out of it. I mean, there is also something positive in being more efficient, of course, but yes, we try not to make people pay the biggest price.
What is the biggest challenge Oxfam is facing recently?
I don't see one challenge. One challenge for sure is the decrease in funds, but also the fact that humanitarian needs are growing, and the fact that geopolitical interests are in the middle of foreign affairs and the government's decisions. Also, humanitarian access is very complicated in a lot of different areas, so it's difficult also to deliver aid. Be it in the Sahel or in Gaza, the impediments are growing as well.
So what would happen to push to accelerate the process of the aid delivery and to encourage the giving nations again to push more donations and international aid?
With more aid, we can support more people. So that is the ultimate goal of our work. And also, my fear is if when you decrease fund, also you increase competitions between organizations, and we are always stronger when we work together in humanitarian action as well as in advocacy and in development work. So I think it's also the cooperation and coordination that we have seen between organizations is something that we should foster. And this is more difficult when there are financial constraints.
Yep, the countries that decided to cut the international aid, the Netherlands, the UK, the United States, what should happen to make them consume the international aid as it was before?
I think an important point is also understanding that security, which is the buzzword now, is not just military security. Security is also providing people with the basic need. So people are more safe if they are protected, if they have access to food, shelter, water. And I think this is a key point to understand that security is multifolded. So I think this is a key point to dialogue with governments that are cutting development and humanitarian funds.
With donors pulling back funding unpredictably, what can humanitarian organizations do to prepare for and soften the effects of these sudden losses?
That's a difficult question. Unfortunately, when cuts are sudden, it's difficult to answer quickly. We diversify our funding sources, but also one way to avoid depending on one donor is also to find the synergies between program and projects. So not to have one program and one project funding a whole response, but having complementarity and synergy between different actions, if this makes sense. Again, I think coordination between organizations is also key, because when one organization has to step down, another one can step in. If we work together, I think this is also very important.
Okay. Are we seeing donors grow tired of sustained crisis? And if yes, how can advocacy challenge this dangerous trend before it costs more lives?
One thing that we do at Oxfam to avoid getting tired of crisis is to connect everything together. I mean, at the end of the day, the root causes of most crises is inequality. So by linking all the root causes, all the causes of different crises, conflict, climate, economic justice is all connected to inequality. So we look at the bigger picture. So this is also what we try to convey to our audience and to the decision makers we talk with.
Given the increasing complexity of global crisis, how does Oxfam balance immediate humanitarian needs with the long-term goals of advocacy and structural change?
Our programs are never taught in silos, so there is always a connection between humanitarian development and advocacy and addressing root causes of inequality. So the secret or the way we do it is to having colleagues, teams, program talking to each other. So this is where the Oxfam Confederation comes in, where is the strength of having a global network based in many countries. Because if we are going to only think short term, we are never going to help people getting out of the vulnerability, and we are just going to create dependence on aid. So it's key to link resilience with humanitarian and advocacy.
But sometimes there's kind of political interference, accusations toward the people who are working in humanitarian aid or aid delivery. So this is kind of pressure on your teams. So how do you handle this?
I would say that the team, especially those who work closer to communities, are getting their motivation from the proximity to the communities themselves, actually, because we are in close contact with people we work with. So this is quite resourceful. And then, as I said also before, the Confederation gives strength also too, because there is also a lot of collaboration in advocacy. We do advocacy at different level in different countries and contexts. So this gives a lot of strength and to colleagues and teams.
Can you tell me a little bit about the strategies does Oxfam use to promote economic justice alongside immediate humanitarian aid?
When we do advocacy about a certain context, we always look at the economic impact of the conflict, for example, or how certain segments of the population are most affected than others, and economy is often at the center of the root causes of a conflict or a crisis.
And how important is youth engagement in Oxfam's advocacy work? How do you involve younger generations in shaping humanitarian policies?
We have a strong base of volunteers and supporters in different countries, and youth people, as you say, are key and are involved and sympathetic to Oxfam arguments such inequality and access to human rights. For instance, they participate in protests we take part in, or other campaigns and actions worldwide.
Can you share a specific example from your work where advocacy successfully influenced the EU aid allocation toward a marginalized or forgotten crisis?
I have an example of a recent advocacy success. Actually, we were invited by the King and the Queen of Belgium to a roundtable of actors working in Gaza, and the King mentioned the situation in Gaza during his speech for the Belgian National Day. So this was quite a success in advocacy-wise in Belgium to give attention to Gaza.
This is impressive. Relevant to this, there have been growing calls for more creative solutions in Gaza. What bold or unconventional approaches should humanitarian actors, other than Oxfam and donors, consider to get aid through and support the population who are more effectively?
I don't think we need a creative solution. I think we need to be allowed to do our work, because at the moment, since March the 2nd, almost no organization have been allowed to deliver truck of aid. So I think we should just be allowed to do our work, and that we are also professional and we know how to do that.
Finally, what is your message to the main players in the aid delivery worldwide regarding the current situation of international aid card and the increase of needs of vulnerable communities among the increasing of crisis zones?
My message is that the countries should not just remain engaged in their commitments to global aid and solidarity, but also remember that by allowing violations of international law, they are also fueling conflict, humanitarian crisis worldwide.
Desiree, thank you for your honesty and passion today. This was not just policy debates, they are about real people whose future depends on the choices made in Brussels and beyond. Your commitment and Oxfam's work challenges us all to see past the headlines and remember the dignity and hope we owe those caught up in the crisis. To everyone listening, the impact of aid or its absence is felt in families struggling for safe water, children waiting for a meal, and whole communities desperate for protection. If this conversation moved you, don't just tune it out, keep talking, speak up, and find a way to help. Change starts with all of us. Desiree, it's been an honor having you here. Take care, everyone, and see you next time on Development Aid Dialogues.